Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I saw something back in 1990 that has haunted me ever since. We were a Boy Scout troop of 16 boys between the ages of 13 and 17, going on a 2-day hike along a trail that ran 60 miles from Richmond to Marion in Indiana. 3 adults supervised us the entire way. They gathered us up on the north side of town one Friday after school in late September, checked our supplies and gear, then off we marched. Most of the journey that evening followed an old abandoned railroad track through farmers' fields. We managed to reach a small bit of forested area just before it got dark, and we pitched tents there, gathered wood for a fire, and had our meals. After we ate, the grown-ups got out a couple of bags of marshmallows to roast, and we all sat around a fire where people had a chance to tell ghost stories. Many of the tales were the classic urban legends, like one about a woman who stopped at a gas station and found out she had a serial killer hiding in her back seat, and one about 2 kids who parked somewhere late at night and only just barely escaped a mental patient with a hook for a hand. But for his third and final story, the troop leader told us all to get up and follow him. We left the safety of the fire and hiked up the ridge to where the railroad tracks were. He pointed down the line a ways, and we all saw something white in the distance. It was a cross set in the ground just to the side of the track. "See that cross?" he said. "That marks the spot where Jack Hobbs died." "Who was Jack Hobbs?" someone asked. "This line used to connect Cincinnati to Chicago, but legend has it that back in 1909, an eastbound train from Chicago missed a switch point and ended up running head-on into a westbound train up near Muncie. 12 people died, dozens were injured. For years after that, farmers all up and down the line started complaining of hearing a train's whistle blowing in the middle of the night, but there were never any trains supposed to be going through at the times they claimed they heard them. Pretty soon rumor spread that what they were hearing was a ghost train, carrying the souls of those 12 dead people, never getting to their destination, damned forever to ride the rails until the end of time. He paused, and we all stood silently, listening for the sound of a train. Being a skeptic, I expected one of the other adults to sneak up behind us with something, but there was nothing but crickets and wind. After about a minute of unnerving silence, he continued. People started trekking out here from all over the place to try to catch a glimpse of the ghost train. One of those people was a guy by the name of Jack Hobbs. He was some sort of paranormal expert out of New York. He followed the tracks kind of like we're doing. So, as the story goes, Jack Hobbs was following the track, carrying all manner of ghost-catching equipment, when all of a sudden he saw a light come out of nowhere ahead of him on the track, and he heard a train's whistle in the air. The ghost train, he thought. I've actually seen the ghost train. He stood there in awe as the light grew brighter, and the whistle from the train grew louder. Just as he heard the screech of metal as the brakes were hit, he realized too late that he was standing in the path of a very real, very powerful locomotive. The troop leader went quiet again, and almost exactly when he did, a loud train whistle screamed directly behind us, causing us all to jump. As I had expected earlier, one of the other grown-ups had sneaked up behind us to finish the story with a good scare. After we had settled down, we went back to the campsite and got ready to go to sleep. I was partnered with a kid named Sant, who turned out to be a heavy sleeper as well as a loud snorer. I wasn't used to having to share space with someone else, and the story of the ghost train had left me somewhat unnerved, so I found it hard to fall asleep. Then the adults went to bed, putting out the fire, and everything was pitch black and the air was filled with animal noises, and there was no way I was going to get any Z's. I was lying there in my sleeping bag, listening to Sant snore, looking out toward the slope up to the track, when all the hooting owls and chirping crickets and chittering squirrels suddenly went dead quiet. Sant snorted once, rolled over, and stopped snoring. Everything was absolutely silent, and when everything goes silent all of a sudden, my ears try to make up for the lack of sensory input by introducing this never-ending high-pitched sound. Even putting my hands over my ears couldn't drown it out because it was inside my head. When I gave up and uncovered my ears, I heard something else. I wasn't sure what to make of it at first. It was very faint. It was coming from somewhere south down the tracks. Shh! Clop! Clop! Something was moving, I realized. Something shifting rocks and leaves as it slowly crept along. I tried to make out where it was coming from, but it was too dark to see anything. An unexplainable cold crept into my sleeping bag, and I started shivering despite several layers of clothing and an additional blanket for warmth. I realized that the cold wasn't really there. It was just my body trying to explain why I was shaking so fiercely. The truth was, I was scared out of my mind, and this was what fear felt like. The moon came out from behind the clouds in the area up by the train tracks, got bathed in its blue light. I stared, straining to make out what was making the sound, but there was nothing visible, just the slow, methodical sound. Shh, clop, clop. Shh, clop, clop. I lay there in my bag and prayed someone else would wake up. A few seconds later, over the ridge, I saw something move. It seemed to rise a couple of inches with each repetition of the sound. Shh, clop, clop, and then back down. It was moving along the train tracks, coming down the line toward the camp, shambling slowly. As it approached, the moonlight made it easier to see. I could distinctly make out someone's head and shoulders. He was marching slowly, eerily along. I thought he must have been walking alongside the rails, on the other side of the slope, but after a minute of his steady gait, he came alongside our camp, and I saw with grim horror what it really was. It was a torso, just the upper half of a man. God is my witness. It was half a person, pulling itself along on its elbows, dragging itself down the railroad track in the direction of that cross we'd been shown. It was barely 10 yards away from me, and the light wasn't that good, but I could make out its ragged, mangled features. Its head was badly mutilated. Hair was missing in clumps. The ear that should have been visible on the side facing me was gone, and there was a deformity to its skull that made it look like a cracked egg. Its arms were bare. The shirt it wore was ragged and torn from what looked like years of dragging itself on its elbows. Every now and then it hefted itself up onto its hands with a low groan. Shh! And I could see sickening bits of its insides hanging out the ripped lower half of its abdomen. Clop, clop. It dropped back down onto its elbows. This thing, this unfathomable wreck of a person, didn't seem to notice our camp, and I lay there shivering in my sleeping bag, praying each second that it would not look my way. Please, God, wake me up. Please, God Almighty, make it go away. It had to be a dream, I thought. This can't exist. Then I heard it speak. Where are they? It was mumbling to itself. Where are they? It just said that over and over as it dragged on down the track and behind some trees out of my sight. I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, but my heart was still racing, and the air seemed trapped in my chest. I wish I could say that was the end of it. I wish I could say that I passed out, woke up the next morning, and told everybody my story, and they all laughed at me. And to this day, I'll never know if what I saw was real. But Sant woke up. He woke up with a loud snort, rolled over, and not seeing me, fumbled out of his sleeping bag and got up. "Sant!" I whispered. "Sant!" But Sant groggily walked past the line of tents and started up the hill to the railroad tracks. I lay there, watching him go, wondering if maybe I'd been dreaming after all, and now, only now, was waking up. Or maybe this thing, this ghost, only showed itself to me to mock my fear? To wave my disbelief in my face? See, we do exist. Sant went past the tracks and down the other side to the point. All I could see was his shoulders and head. From there, he looked much like the shambling thing had looked when I first saw it, and again I was stricken with doubt. I could hear him sigh, and the sound of piss hitting the ground. Then I heard, shh, clop, 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 clop. Before I could even scream, I saw it. The thing, the half a man, moving at a frightening speed on its hands. It destroyed lower half roughly, flying across the ground as it moved. It made the distance from the edge of the trees to where Sant stood in a matter of seconds. And just as it got there, it screamed, "Where are they?" Sant never made a noise. It reached him before he could even look, and the piddling of his urination disappeared in the same instant he did. There was a sound I can't even begin to describe. Then another, like someone was tearing open a burlap sack of potatoes. Finally, a wet splash, followed by something heavy hitting the ground and tumbling down the hill. By then, I didn't need to scream. The moment the thing yelled, several people woke up. Nobody seemed to see where the noise had come from, but they shouted in surprise, and their shouting woke up others. And in less than a minute, the whole troop was awake and trying to find their flashlights. Finally, I unfroze and I started screaming, "Sant! Sant! It got Sant!" Thrashing about in my sleeping bag, trying to get my hands free in order to point. "Everybody stay here. Get a fire going," the troop leader yelled. He and one of the other adults ran up the hill to the tracks and started searching around with their flashlights. Other kids were asking me, "Was it Sant? What got Sant?" And I realized I didn't know what to tell them. Half a man? A ghost? What the hell was I supposed to tell them I saw? So I just did what any 13-year-old would do. Jack Hobbs. It was Jack Hobbs. He was cut in half by the train and crawling on his elbows. Yeah, that went over well with everybody, of course. We heard the other guy that had gone up to the rise with the troop leader suddenly shout, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph!" And there was a mad scramble as everybody tried to run up to the tracks to see what had happened. The troop leader caught us before the top, red-faced and eyes bulging, and started yelling, "Everybody get back! Everybody get back! Get back to the fire! There might be a bear nearby." "A bear?" somebody asked. "Gather up your gear," the third grown-up ordered. The second adult returned, wiping at his forehead and looking paler than I'd ever seen anyone look before. The three of them held a little meeting together away from the rest of us, while we all huddled around a newly made fire, and I was bombarded with questions about what I had seen. I tried to describe it, but it seemed so surreal that it was almost like waking from a dream where bits and pieces of memory fade before you can describe them. I realized that the more I spent trying to describe it, the more insane I sounded. It was decided that the troop leader and the third grown-up would stay put while the kids were marched to the nearest farm to find a phone and call the police and their parents. 15 boys between the ages of 13 and 17, numb with fear and horror, guided by a single adult through the dark night along the abandoned railroad tracks until we hit a cornfield and marched nervously and cautiously through tall stalks of corn, trying to keep tabs on each other. The rest of that night was a blur. I barely remember the details of the farmhouse we waited at, the folks who let us come in and use their phone. I don't remember most of Saturday either. I remember my parents picked me up before the sun was up, and I remember talking to a police officer in a uniform about my version of events. I remember drinking a glass of milk and feeling like my stomach was churning. But the timeline of what happened when is jumbled. The official conclusion was that Sant had been mauled by a bear, literally torn in half by it. I didn't get the gritty details, but I've never really wanted them. Honestly, I barely knew him, having only first met him at a troop meeting 3 weeks prior to the hike. I quickly refused to talk about what I had seen. I told too many kids that night that I had ended up going to school with. Before I even had a chance to really make any friends, I'd become known as the weird kid who saw the bear that killed Sant and thought it was a ghost. One guy even accused me of being directly responsible for his death. He might have been right. I know what I saw, though. There was no bear. I don't like going camping anymore for obvious reasons. I've tried it, but the few times I managed to handle it long enough to fall asleep, I hear that sound in my dreams. Shh. Clop. Clop. And I inevitably wake up screaming.
Taking out the old man had been simple for Black Wolf. Locate, break in, kill him, and secure the body for transport. The job had been clean and bloodless, leaving no evidence. Once he'd finished the hit, he placed the target in a thick canvas bag and fastened the 4 restraints to hold the body in place. Satisfied that he had completed the most challenging part of the job, he looked around outside to make sure he wouldn't be seen. It was 2 a.m, so he figured he was safe. He threw the bag over his shoulder and took it out the back door and into the alley. After Black Wolf dumped the body in the car's trunk, he poked it a couple of times to be on the safe side. It didn't move, thank God. He climbed in the front seat of his luxurious black sedan. I'll be glad when this job is over. There's some bad juju going on with this one. He lit a cigarette, tuned the radio to a classical music station, and drove away. His orders were to deliver the cargo to the nearest wet room. The site was hidden in some woods just outside the rear-view town of Whitesville, a 3-hour drive. The team there would handle the final disposal. Black Wolf had made the trip many times. It was the perfect place for a drop, dark and secluded. He hoped that the others would have things ready to roll when he arrived with the former Erik Werner. He didn't like spending any more time in the woods than necessary. Even for a man with his background, the place was creepy, unholy. Black Wolf had been driving for 2 hours. One more, and he'd be near the site. It typically took around 5 hours for things to turn dangerous, so he was glad to find himself safely ahead of schedule. He decided to use the extra time to relax and put his mind on better things than the body and the back. He had always enjoyed the elegance and complexity of classical music. It helped to bring order to the chaos around him. As he conducted the orchestra with his free right hand, his stomach growled along, reminding him that he hadn't eaten in hours. There was an all-night gas station about 10 miles before his destination. He was so hungry that he was willing to roll the dice on an ancient wiener from a greasy rotisserie. He'd dropped in at the store he had nicknamed the Stop and Rob on many occasions and had gotten to know Jack, the old man who ran the place. Jack was a 3-time loser with felony convictions. He didn't burden himself with suspicions about the mysterious man with the sleek automobile that made occasional trips to the middle of nowhere. Black Wolf pulled up to one of the gas pumps, threw the car into park, and climbed out. The night air was thick and humid, coating his skin like warm mud. Smells were absorbed by its immensity, creating a dank fog, but he could just identify the pungent scent of the 2 young men loitering outside. Black Wolf sized them up. Greasy losers. They looked like a couple of 20-somethings with no luck and very few prospects. Their gangly necks and arms were home to cheap tattoos, their clothes ratty. He knew their species well, had been there himself once upon a time before the military straightened him out. When Black Wolf neared the gas station's entrance, one of the men stepped in front of him, causing a collision.
Sorry, mister.
Black Wolf didn't want any trouble this late in the game, so he just gave the scrawny stranger a glare of disapproval. Black Wolf walked through the smeary plexiglass door. The overly sweet stench of floor disinfectant made him queasy. He winced as his eyes adjusted to the uncomfortable brightness of the store. The harsh fluorescent light emitted a low hum that made his eardrums vibrate and gave everything a washed-out appearance.
Hey there, Jack.
Sup, young fella? Black Wolf checked out the encrusted rack of revolving francs at the end of the counter and decided to peruse the snack aisle instead. He settled on a bag of pretzels, some beef jerky, and a Red Bull from the wall cooler. Jack began ringing up the items.
That'll be $6.30.
Black Wolf's car roared as it rocketed out of the small lot, leaving behind a veil of gravel and dust. He slapped his jacket pockets. Empty. Why that little? Angry and embarrassed, he turned to Jack.
Those 2 punks who are loitering outside. Do you know 'em?
Sorry to say I do. One of 'em's name is Curtis, I think. Can't remember the other one. Should I call the popo?
No. I'll handle this. Any idea where they might be heading?
If I had to guess, I'd say that old abandoned farmhouse a couple mile up the road. Druggies sometimes use it as a shooting gallery. Black Wolf had an ace in the hole, the car's tracking device. He took out his cell phone, accessed the app, and waited. Soon the car's location appeared on the screen. It hadn't traveled far. Suddenly the dot turned left and slowed down.
Gotcha.
He looked at Jack.
Looks like you were right. They're somewhere just up the road a ways. That'd be the farmhouse, correct?
Yep.
Don't suppose you've a car I can borrow?
Jack pointed out the window at a rusty riding mower.
Seriously?
Black Wolf asked. Too many DUIs.
Guess I'm jogging.
You know, there's 2 of them and 1 of you, Jack said.
Are you sure you don't want me to call the cops? I think I got this. So, you gonna kill him? Nope. I'm gonna save him.
As Black Wolf huffed up the highway, Curtis and Razor were maneuvering the car down the narrow lane that led to the farmhouse.
Where should I park it?
Curtis asked. Pull it around back. We can put it in the barn, Razor replied. Curtis eased around the dilapidated two-story house and followed a worn dirt path about 30 yards to the rickety barn. Razor jumped out and swung open its large wooden doors. He entered first, using the car's headlights to light his path as he peered through the semi-darkness.
Anybody in here? We ain't the cops. Just want to know if it's cool to come in.
No one answered.
Hey, Rays, can I pull in or not?
Oh, we're clear. Razor stood near the entrance and guided Curtis inside. Once the car was entirely in, he pulled the door shut, then lit the 4 lanterns they kept stashed around the barn. Curtis sprang from the car and began circling it like a bird of prey. He ran his nicotine-stained fingers through his long, stringy hair. A huge smile stretched across his face.
Dude, I am so jacked right now. Can you believe this? Oh, man, what a score.
We gotta get Lil B out here to check this mother out.
He'll probably give us top dollar for it,
Razor said.
Shoot him a text. Let him know that. The hell was that?
Curtis asked. Equally startled, Razor said,
I think it came from the trunk.
They moved towards the rear of the car with the same stealth they used when breaking and entering. Hello? Razor asked. No reply. He lowered his head to the trunk and listened for a moment. The two jumped back.
Dude, I think somebody's locked in there,
Curtis said. The sedan rocked back and forth, its shock absorbers yelping.
Should we let him out?
Razor huffed.
Hell no. What's wrong with you?
Okay.
Let's just go outside, roll a couple of joints, and figure out what to do next. Yeah, okay. There ain't nobody around to hear no noise, so we're good.
They had walked about 10 yards when a metallic explosion rang out from the barn. A few seconds later, there was a heavy thud.
Whoa, what just happened?
Curtis asked.
I ain't sure, but we need to go check on the car. Something might have fallen on it. Like what? I don't know. Maybe something fell out the loft. Lil B ain't gonna be interested in no beat-up ride. Let's go together. It might be we need to mess somebody up.
They returned to the barn. The trunk hatch had been blown off and hung over the edge of one of the lofts, 15 feet up.
I don't know who was in the trunk, but they sure wanted out,
Razor observed. Curtis retrieved one of the lanterns and raised its wick. He inched toward the mangled opening of the trunk and looked inside.
Yo, check this out!
A shredded canvas bag covered the bottom of the trunk. Shattered metal buckles dangled from its thick straps. The whole space was dripping with thick red slime that smelled like oil and rotten meat.
This is messed up, Race. Let's get out of...
The shrill sound was deafening. Heavy footsteps moved around the loft. Then they heard something drop into the shadows. They didn't wait to find out what. The two ran from the barn and sprinted toward the dark farmhouse.
Run! We're dead meat out here in the open!
Curtis yelled. They busted through the back door and into the dark, grimy kitchen. Having participated in numerous parties and minor drug deals, they knew the layout of the house well. Curtis was holding the lantern in a death grip.
Check them drawers for a knife!
The wooden drawers fell to the floor as Razor yanked him from the base cabinet. All were empty, save for dust and dead bugs.
No luck.
From there, they went to the living room at the front of the house. Broken furniture was strewn about. The water-damaged ceiling sagged and cobwebs coated the corners of the ravaged room. They pushed a musty, mouse-infested couch away from the wall and hunkered down behind it. The damp, moldy material coated their lungs with every pant.
Do you hear anything?
Razor asked. Shh. Be quiet. The tall grass that ran along the side of the house rustled. There was a sniffing and snorting. Is that thing trying to sniff us out? Curtis whispered. The noise stopped. They waited. Something was climbing up the side of the house. They could hear chunks of wood being ripped away and dropping to the ground as the thing clawed its way to the second floor. An upstairs window shattered. Glass tinkled and feet thumped across the room directly over them. They froze, barely breathing. Wide-eyed, Curtis and Razor stared at one another as the thing clumped down the stairs, grunting and sniffing. The floor vibrated as it stomped around the living room. When it got to the couch, it stopped. Silence. Curtis extinguished the lantern. His muscles prepared to run. The thing gave a loud grunt as it grabbed hold of the couch. Cool air swept over them. The couch flew across the room and smashed into the far wall. A rancid stench assaulted their nostrils. A shadowy form crouched before them. As it rose, glass cascaded off its outer shell, and two dull, bulging eyes swiveled towards them. With its bony frame and grotesquely long arms and legs, it resembled a human-sized praying mantis. Thinly stretched human skin covered most of its spindly body. Its wrinkled head was that of an elderly man, the scalp punctuated with tufts of white hair. In its gaping mouth was an enormous, pink, pulpy maw with a flapping tongue in the middle. The two men screamed as the thing reared back. When it fell forward, it grabbed Razor with its hooked hands and flung him against the wall. His limp body dropped to the floor. Then the thing turned to Curtis. He was numb all over. The thing drew its arm back, preparing to strike. He closed his eyes, wondering how bad his death would hurt. He lamented his foolish life choices. I'm so sorry, God, for everything. Suddenly, there were two sharp pops. The creature cried out, and Curtis's eyes popped open. Curtis saw someone standing just inside the doorway in a shooter's stance. He recoiled as the shooter fired two more explosive rounds at the thing. Pieces of its shell clattered to the floor as it screeched and jumped upward, attaching itself to the ceiling. The shooter closed the distance until he was directly under the thing. He fired several more bullets into its body. The dripping man-monster clawed at the ceiling, raining plaster upon Curtis and the towering figure. It finally tore through and pulled itself up and into the room above them. In the gloom, Curtis couldn't recognize his savior right away. But as he dusted the plaster from his face, he realized it was the man whose elegant machine was now parked in the barn.
Please don't shoot me, sir. I'm sorry about the car, okay?
Forget about the car. I need to kill that thing, or a lot of people are going to die. Starting with us.
What the hell is it?
It was still a man when I threw it in the trunk. But there's a short window of time before it morphs into that,
he said, pointing up.
I was well on my way to the disposal site when you and your idiot friend decided to go Grand Theft Auto on me. Now, I'm gonna need your help. It's too much to handle on my own.
You got the wrong guy, mister. Look, my friend needs...
Leave him. Your friend's dead.
Curtis halted. The man was serious. If the man didn't kill him, the bug would. Black Wolf surveyed the battered room. He picked through the busted furniture until he found a table leg. He moved around the room, tapping on the ceiling and listening.
What are you doing?
I'm monitoring its movements.
After a few more pokes, they heard scuttling above them. Then it stopped.
It seems to be taking its time. Regrouping or hiding. I can't tell which. I don't think it's through with us yet. It likely sees you and me as an immediate threat to its escape. We need to contain it.
Curtis shook his head.
No way.
Listen, boy. If you've got the stones to steal my car, then you've got the stones to help me kill that freak before the worst happens.
The worst? As in, it ain't happened yet? What is that thing?
5 hours ago, that thing was Dr. Erik Werner. A microscopic piece of alien DNA outwitted him, some other dumb scientists, and a few pompous generals. Werner and his so-called geniuses studied it, experimented on it, and did some other sci-fi crap. Of course, they immediately saw dollar signs and military applications, but they didn't consider what that tiny group of cells might evolve into. It's like looking at a strange egg and not knowing what's gonna pop out of it. Well, now we do. It's making up its mind.
About what?
The most efficient way to kill us. Unless we kill it first. That's the choice I prefer.
Curtis gulped.
Are you out of your damn mind? Let's just get out of here and let some other fools handle this.
Ignoring Curtis, Black Wolf followed a noise above him, prodding the ceiling as he went. With every jab, the thing moved.
Who are you, man?
Curtis's voice trembled. Continuing to track his prey, Black Wolf said,
Some other elite trackers and I were brought in to hunt and kill these things while they're still human and manageable. Once that's done, their bodies are delivered to lab wonks who know how to dispose of them. Things have to happen fast, though.
There was more movement above them.
What happens if you don't get the body there in time?
First, it turns into what killed your friend. Then, that worst I mentioned comes next.
Do you think you can kill it?
Don't know. Haven't dealt with one in that stage of development.
Black Wolf stabbed the ceiling hard and the thing ran. They heard it enter another room, slamming the door.
Bingo. We got it,
Black Wolf said.
How many of those things are out there?
So far, we've only located a handful of infected outsiders and lab folks. We took them out before they advanced too far. Now, I've got to somehow ice Alien up there and get it to our local disposal site before things really go south. Does that satisfy your curiosity?
I wish you hadn't told me. Will you kill me if I run?
This is a highly classified initiative. What do you think? Good news is, there's a way out of this for you if you do as I say.
Curtis sighed.
What do you want me to do?
It's closed itself off in a room at the top of those stairs. I need you to go up and get its attention. When it comes after you, lead it back down, and I'll use some high-impact rounds to penetrate its skull. Questions?
Since this is classified, how do I know you won't shoot me when this is all over?
'Cause I always keep my word. But if I ever get wind that you've been shooting off your mouth, I'll come back and kill you myself. I think we both know that the only reason you're going up there is to save your skin. So if this works, I'll owe you your life. Can you work with that?
Curtis nodded. Let's just get this over with. Black Wolf began loading the gun's magazine while Curtis grabbed the lantern and climbed the creaky stairs. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Curtis's legs were shaking, his teeth chattering. Icy sweat slid down his back like cold fingers as he inched closer to the room where he did not want to go. When he reached the second floor, Curtis stopped and listened. It'd been quiet for too long. He wondered just how cunning the humanoid was. He tiptoed to the room where they had last heard the creature, a bedroom. He threw open the door and stepped back, expecting an assault. When none came, he eased his head into the dusky room and looked around. In the dimness, he could make out a filthy mattress on the floor surrounded by cigarette butts, used syringes, and empty liquor bottles. Seeing nothing of the Werner bug, he entered. Curtis stepped in a puddle of dark goo. Why won't this thing just die? He followed the trail to the en-suite bathroom, where he found the door ajar. You got this, man. He took a deep, shaky breath, as if he were preparing to take a high bungee dive. When he was ready, he eased the door open and leaned inside. A thick string of drool dropped on the floor in front of him. He looked up at the bathroom ceiling. Curtis jumped back just in time to avoid being crushed. He screamed and bolted from the room. He flew down the stairs 3 at a time as the creature lumbered after him. The air behind him moved as the thing swung its powerful arm, giving a loud bark each time it missed. Black Wolf was at the base of the stairs waiting to fire. Seeing him, Curtis felt equal parts panic and relief. Wet chunks of brain and bone splattered over the staircase. Curtis barely made it over the railing and out of the way of the howling beast as it tumbled down the stairs behind him. The broken creature flopped at Black Wolf's feet. He fired 3 more enhanced rounds into what was left of its exposed skull. Thick blood squirted from its shattered head, the flow decreasing with every fading heartbeat. A long, fetid breath marked its end. Oh my God! Is it dead? Black Wolf kicked the carcass with the tip of his heavy boot.
Yeah, it's dead. Now go to the barn and look for anything we can use to tie it to the car. Then pull around to the front. Hurry!
Curtis was too stunned to move, so Black Wolf went over and pulled him to his feet.
You're gonna be fine. Just let the adrenaline settle down. Now, go and get...
A wet tearing sound came from the dead monster.
Oh no.
Black Wolf muttered. What do you mean, oh no? Is it dead or not? Black Wolf eased back over to the carcass. He turned on his small mag light and shined it on the twisting face. Its jaws cracked apart, ripping the surrounding skin like cellophane. 3 thick spider-like legs appeared on each side of the monster's mouth, spreading it wide. An oily black object the size and shape of a baseball pulled itself out of the ruptured opening and crawled onto the dead creature's chest. It looked like a clawless crab with 2 eyes attached to short stalks. It hissed at Black Wolf. What's happening? Curtis pleaded. Is that...
The worst.
Black Wolf raised his gun and began firing, but the alien arachnid jumped out of the way with a blurry speed. It charged forward, working its way toward Black Wolf, forcing him and Curtis to back up against one of the living room walls. Black Wolf kept firing until the gun's chamber sprang forward and clicked.
Oh, God, this is it, isn't it? Curtis barely recognized his own voice. Please let it be quick. I don't want to feel that thing biting me, infecting me. The shimmering creature crawled toward them, its daggered feet clicking on the warped wooden floor. Black Wolf hurled his gun at the creature, unsurprised when he missed. He tried to move to his left and right to get around it, but by hopping from side to side, it blocked his path before he could complete a whole step. When the monstrosity was 6 feet from them, it reared back, exposing 4 dripping mandibles. It lurched forward. Curtis and Black Wolf jolted. Razor came up behind the creature, hammering it repeatedly with a long metal lampstand. Red and yellow gunk squirted out, some spraying onto Curtis's sneakers. So, what'd I miss? The 2 kids waited in the back seat of Black Wolf's sedan while he torched the farmhouse. Curtis figured it must be necessary to destroy all evidence of the monster. While they waited on Black Wolf's return, he filled Razor in on everything that had happened while he was unconscious. The information had Razor contemplating every possible meaning of the term grave concern. "Do you think he's gonna have to kill us?" Razor asked. "This is some born identity kind of stuff." "No, I think this guy'll cut us loose. He just seems like the type. Dangerous but reasonable. He had a job to do, that's all, and we helped him do it. So all we gotta do is convince him we'll keep our mouths shut. I think he'll be cool with that." Curtis looked out the rear window and saw the silhouette of Black Wolf sprinting across the way as the house blazed behind him. Black Wolf jumped in the front and slammed the door shut, then sat silently for a good long while.
So, boys, what happens next?
Curtis was too nervous to answer him. Razor said, "I don't know. What are our choices?"
Well,
Black Wolf began.
I can take you back to that crappy little convenience store and let you take your chances. Or you can come with me.
Razor swallowed. "Where would you take us if we went with you?" Black Wolf smiled.
I never would have thought it, but you boys showed some spunk back there. You might suck at everything else in life, but you know how to slay a dragon, by God. I figure you 2 now have more experience than the general public in handling freaks of science. So, you want to join the organization? It's plenty dangerous, but as they told me in the Marines, it's not just a job, it's an adventure.
Razor and Curtis looked at one another as if to divine the other's response to the unusual job offer. "Does it pay good?" Razor asked.
The organization wants its trackers focused on the job, so you'll never be distracted by want.
Black Wolf answered.
Anything else?
Curtis relaxed his body, placed his hands behind his head as a cushion, and let the plush leather seat absorb his lean frame. Yeah, I got one. Will we get a sweet ride like this one?
Actually,
Black Wolf chuckled,
you can have this one. It just needs a new trunk.
He started the sedan's engine and backed out of the barn and up the dirt path before stopping at the rough 2-lane road. Hanging a ride out of the property, he drove the 2 20-somethings with very few prospects away from the rearview town of Wyattsville. And that was Black Wolf Sedan by author P.D. Williams. A good reminder that career opportunities can pop up anywhere, so always be prepared to put your best foot forward. Also, pre-trip your vehicle before you go on the road. Even if you're sure your spare's in there, it never hurts to check for monsters. Thanks, P.D. A little about the author.
P.D. Williams is an author, composer, and multi-instrumentalist who enjoys writing about himself in the third person. His short horror fiction stories have appeared in several popular book series, e-zines, and podcasts. The author resides in North Carolina with his long-suffering wife, who recently advanced to the second round of selections for sainthood. For more info on P.D. Williams, you can check out his website at pdwilliamsauthor.com. And do me a favor, would you? Subscribe to my podcast wherever you're listening and leave me a 5-star review and a kind word, even if you're listening on YouTube. I need soldiers on all fronts to win this battle, and I really do appreciate it. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You'll find me personally on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget about those submissions. If you've got a story or two you'd like to be featured on this show, send it to drewbloodhorror@gmail.com. If selected, you'll get the full treatment. I also want to let you guys know something else. Our good buddy Jeff Sturdivant's new audiobook has just been released on Audible. It's called Gross Embellishments, and it's pretty much a sequel to Occupational Hazards. This audiobook has several of Jeff's tales narrated by the likes of John McClane, Jason Hill, Paul J. McSorley, as well as myself. I've already listened to it, y'all, and I gotta tell you, it's pretty fantastic. So do yourselves a favor and go find Jeff's new audiobook, Gross Embellishments. Also, thanks to N.M. Brown for helping us find these stories. Not to diminish P.D.'s wife's efforts, but Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights has a saint of our own, Saint Brown. Thank you, Venerable Natalie, for your saintly intervention. And thank you, Stu, for giving it to her good. I'm back. Okay, listen. I'm not going to be able to finish this part. I cannot stop laughing. Okay, so, well, I'm afraid this is where we part ways, at least till next week. So grab a drink for the road, friend. But wherever you're going, don't stop till you get there. And hey, let's do it again next week. Next week, shit gets weird. I'd like to recognize a few more of our friends from the YouTube community. Italia369, Mark Burris, and Drew Boudreau. I truly appreciate all the comments and support y'all show me. So without further ado, Italia369, Mark Burris, and Drew Boudreau. May the wind be at your back, and may the road rise up to meet you. Close the blinds, lock the door, and check under the bed. And as long as no one's watching, go fuck yourselves. Good night, y'all.
The evening would arrive before long, but Marion wanted a bit more time outside. She hoped to study the birds that still hopped and pecked at the dusty grounds around Ernstmoor Estate. Sometimes they would turn their heads, directing one of their black and focused eyes at Marion as she approached. If she drew any nearer, they bounded effortlessly into the air and then arrived elsewhere after a brief, swooping arc through the sky. Just a month earlier, Marion had been given a water whistle for Christmas. It was meant to imitate the sounds of a canary when the air was blown through. She used it now and again as she walked, creating a loud and piercing trill like the song of a bird. Marian observed intently how the noise drew the interest of some birds, but not of others. The whistle had been a gift from her grandfather. Grandpa Tom was Marian's favorite guardian and her hero in numerous ways that no other family member could match. Marian often felt as though Tom Ernst was the only person she could trust with her whole heart. She loved her grandfather, and every new gift or lesson he imparted to her became immediately precious inside her mind. Each day, they would talk about something new. Marian would learn from Grandpa Tom, or she would be allowed to share her feelings with him. Tom was the only person who allowed Marian to talk to her heart's content. The water whistle she held now was the latest in a long line of cherished connections between young Marian and her grandfather. Although Marian was only 11 years old, she had already been taught many things by her grandfather. She had learned crueler lessons from others living in Ernstmore Estate, but had also grown somewhat adept at avoiding those in the house who did not have her best interests at heart. There was mean old Hector, for example. He was one of Tom Ernst's sons, but never treated Marian as though she were part of the family. Marian often wondered about what made Hector so unfriendly toward her. Her memory provided no hint as to why it had always been this way. She did not feel that she had ever done anything to make Hector dislike her. The light from the setting sun was fading around her, and it cast everything in a kind of half-monochrome. The former brilliance of the bird's feathers was now muted to shades of gray. She sat for a moment, pensive, and observed her joy to be surrounded by the peaceful flow of nature around Ernstmore's grounds. She trilled another soft whistle out into the air. She remembered that Grandpa Tom had warned her against staying outside until very late, but there was still a glow of twilight illuminating everything around her, for now. There was still time to enjoy nature before the things that Grandpa Tom called the night wanderers would begin to stir. He had not elaborated the first time that he warned Marian about this. Seeing how the name alone had disturbed her, Ernst dropped the subject and did not discuss it further, nor had Marian pressed her grandfather on what specific form a night wanderer might take. He had only said that they came to Ernstmore Estate from the woods. The closer you were to the woods at night, the closer you were to dying in a way that nobody deserved. That is what Tom Ernst had told her. Marian remembered that his warning had been prompted by her presentation of a spider she had caught one evening. Were the night wanderers a kind of deadly spider? It was doubtless that they were some manner of creature that became plentiful only after darkness had fallen. Marian shuddered to imagine what Grandpa Tom might have meant, and so she pushed the story out of her mind. There was still perhaps half an hour of the day's waning light left for her to enjoy. She would surely be inside before it grew too dark. Aside from the unprompted cruelties of old Hector, the world was finally beginning to make sense to 11-year-old Marian. Her grandfather taught her all about the world and the different kinds of people in it. Together, they explored all over the painted, oaken globe that Tom Ernst kept in his study. Grandpa Tom explained that there were honest and dishonest people everywhere in the world, and that it was sometimes difficult to tell the difference between these two types of personalities. He taught her about business and about the ways to be successful in a changing world. Tom said Marian could be whatever she wanted to be when she grew up, but she should start thinking about what that meant now. Marian sent another soft trill of air through her whistle as she thoughtfully observed the sky growing darker. The night was coming by small but rapid degrees, and Marian knew she should soon return to the estate for supper. She did not notice Hector approaching to stand behind her. He had not called her, nor had he approached her in his usual manner. Hector usually tramped loudly on heavy feet and huffed out his breaths as though perpetually exhausted by the effort of moving. This time, however, Hector had been deliberately quiet. He snuck up on Marion, intending to startle the child. Gripping the back of her dress's collar and yanking roughly backward, he pulled Marion off her feet and forced her to land, sitting against the muddy grass. "You've gone and ruined your dress," he grumbled. "And you've wasted my time as well. I've been sent to gather you for supper when instead we should both already be eating." "I'm sorry, Hector," Marion answered automatically. Any other response would only enrage the brutish man. "Let's hurry to supper then. Will that be all right?" "Oafish girl," Hector replied as he turned to begin his huffing and puffing march toward the estate's main entrance. They walked together only a short distance, and yet the darkness was swiftly arriving. By the time that they had reached the sturdy double doors leading to the estate's foyer, the dusk had turned fully to night. At the dining table, Hector's attacks on Marion did not relent. "She's an indolent child," he grumbled through a mouthful of food. "She isn't," said old Tom Ernst. His tone was calm, but firm and authoritative. Marion smiled with gladness that her grandfather was there to defend her. She said nothing in response, though, and neither did Hector. Everyone ate in silence for the majority of the meal, although Grandpa Tom did initiate conversation a few more times. He asked Marion what kind of birds she had seen while adventuring outside, and whether she knew the proper names for their anatomical features. Tom recommended that Marion learn to draw the birds that she saw. He added that he would soon obtain a notebook and set of coloring pencils for his granddaughter to have. This, he said, would allow Marion to begin journaling the things that she discovered. Marion thanked him, profusely and earnestly. She noted, as she did so, that Hector's scowl deepened with each kind word shared between Marion and her grandfather. Hector stalked Marion through Ernstmoor most evenings, harping with pleasure on her every action. She began to learn how to evade him through the house's many rooms and corridors, though. Just staying in motion was usually enough, because the older man eventually slumped into a reclining chair or onto a couch rather than continue tracking her. If Hector could not keep up with Marion, he often allowed his attention to fall to other things. It was simply a matter of staying ahead of old Hector, or else of staying nearby to her grandfather. Tom Ernst retired to bed soon after supper, however, so for the majority of each evening, Marion and Hector mainly were left alone with each other. Hector's mistreatment stemmed from misplaced anger at his own father, Thomas Ernst. To see Marion showered with praise and affection made Hector sick to the pit of his stomach. The natural desire that Marion should thrive was exactly what Hector envied about her relationship with Tom. Hector despised that anyone should enjoy this kind of nurturing love from the man whose success Hector so severely wished to emulate. Marion was too young to understand this, but she sensed the form of his resentment in the way he treated her. In later years, Marion would understand more fully why she had been punished with such abhorrent eagerness by Hector. It was simply because she enjoyed Tom Ernst's love. The Widow's Walk had become a favorite area where Marion could be free of Hector, at least for a while. He loathed to follow her upstairs from the ground floor to the rooftop of Ernstmoor Estate, and Hector's laziness often surpassed his desire to track the child. Marion thought joyfully about the many stars that the outdoor walkway could reveal to her on a night like tonight. Marion enjoyed the quiet and solitude that could be found up there, She would sometimes watch the stars or bring a lamp by which she could read a book in the crisp nighttime air. Tonight, however, she had brought no light. She carried only her water whistle and now added a long woolen scarf, which she began lacing around her neck and shoulders for extra warmth in the frigid outdoor air. She looked for the moon, but tonight it had waned to new darkness. It was an orb of deep gray on a field of otherwise perfect black. The stars, though, were crisp and bright. They were countless and yet discreetly permanent in their formations. Marian thought to the promise of a notebook with which she could draw all the things that she saw each day in vibrant colors. She wished already that she could preserve the constellations above her, enjoy them, and continue studying them during the daytime. Marian felt powerfully at peace and remained to stare upward until she heard the sound of heavy footfalls trumping up the stairs to the Widow's Walk. The door was thrown open suddenly by Hector, as she had guessed it would be just before he appeared there. Especially keen on disturbing Marian tonight, he now huffed with the effort of climbing up to the roof of Ernstmoor. "Give me that whistle," he demanded. In her stargazing, she absent-mindedly held the gift from her grandfather between her fingertips. Marian remained motionless and allowed Hector to pluck the toy from her hands. "I wouldn't want you making a racket up here," said Hector. "Not while I teach you this lesson." It took Marian a moment to realize what he meant. Those seconds of confusion were all that Hector needed to put his plan into motion. He turned and passed back through the door that led to the Widow's Walk from inside. Standing to block the doorway, he spoke sternly to her. "You should not flee from your elders, especially when they only wish to provide you with wisdom and guidance." Even as he pretended on this point, Marian could hear the superficiality of it. There was only malevolence dripping from his voice, and nothing else. She searched for words that might save her before she was locked out, cast into winter cold that would only worsen as the night continued. She took a silent step forward and found that she could think of nothing that might convince the hateful man to spare her. Hector was behind the door and locking it before Marian could say a word in response. Marian felt herself hyperventilating. She was suddenly coming to grips with the material terror of knowing that Hector would certainly let her freeze to death rather than release her from his domineering ways. He would come to retrieve her in the morning, and if she had frozen to death, he would feign shock and tell everyone that Marian must have accidentally locked herself out. If she survived, Hector would claim that he had taught her a valuable lesson about respecting her elders. Marian looked around herself, seeking desperately for a source of heat by which she might spare herself the torment of an icy winter's night. Thin wisps of smoke were rising lazily from the nearby chimney of the estate. The fire which heated the house would certainly be tended to all night, or else the chill would soon wake Grandpa Tom to start the fire anew. Marian could count on the meager warmth from that, at least. Climbing over the railing of the Widow's Walk to crouch and then sit with her back against the chimney, she felt the temperature of the air rise by a few degrees. Still, her hands and her feet cried out in their discomfort. Those extremities warned her that they would be frostbitten within a few hours unless they were protected from the cold. Marian huddled herself into a sitting position and then used her long woolen scarf to bundle her hands beneath her armpits. To warm her feet, she tucked them securely underneath her folded legs. She would not sleep well, but she at least would be warm enough not to freeze. Marian knew that morning would come sooner if she could pass into slumber, so she did her best to quiet her mind and forget her surroundings. Her grandfather had taught her about poise and patience during hard times. He shared stories about times when he had been freezing and hungry. "At least I've eaten," Marion told herself. Soon, she was asleep. It was much darker night when Marion woke up again. Had she even really awoken? The atmosphere felt surreal, as though something important was now changed from the way it had been before. Was she still trapped outside, perched atop the rooftop walkways of her own home? Marion dared not move her body from the warmth-preserving position in which she had fallen asleep, even though her nose was numb and she wished badly to rub some feeling back into it. Her eyes began to adjust to the blackness around her. In the colorless contrast of her low-light vision, she could see the estate's grounds extending out beyond the house. Everything was motionless, except the gentle sway of the trees whenever a wind came through. Marion then suddenly noticed another subtle source of motion that existed at the limits of what she could see. It looked to Marion like a man was standing idly near the perimeter of the Ernst Moore property grounds. The figure was just beyond the estate's outer fence, near where the untamed woods began. She strained to see whether it was a real interloper or simply a hallucination. As she struggled to define the details of the motion that she saw, the shape of the man seemed to spring suddenly onto the tall, wrought iron fence of the estate's property border. Moving like a spider, the form of whatever Marion was seeing moved over the top of the fence and was on the other side with impossible speed. She tried to cringe back against the chimney in fear, but her muscles did not respond readily. She felt paralyzed and remembered suddenly that Grandpa Ernst had once told her a story about being rendered immobile by a half-waking nightmare. In Tom's case, the terrible state had been induced by him falling asleep while lost in the woods. Marion tried to remind herself that she was likely only hallucinating the monster she had seen approaching Ernst Moore Estate. It must undoubtedly be a waking nightmare, she insisted inside her mind. It did not matter if her senses screamed out that what she now witnessed was terribly real. Moving only her eyes, Marion confirmed that the scrambling figure was now moving toward Ernst Moore Estate with unnatural speed. It moved like an injured spider, limping dramatically on four limbs that seemed to be bent at extreme and irregular angles. The form crawled in a way that kept both its body and head close to the ground. There was nowhere she could flee or hide if, by chance, the invader that she had spotted eventually noticed her atop the roof. Marion pressed her eyes tightly closed and tried to pretend that she was not there at all. There came a clamor of skittering noises that sounded like hailstones falling rapidly against the tin and wooden portions of the estate's roof. Marion had heard this sound many nights before. She always assumed that acorns or something similar were simply raining down onto the house from a mundane source. Had it always instead been monsters scaling the outside of the estate? Marion pressed her eyes even more tightly closed and felt two hot teardrops roll down her face. These were the night wanderers that Grandpa Tom had warned her about. Now she was likely to be lost to them. Hector was killing her in a way that her grandfather had said nobody deserved. The pulsing agitation of her fear broke Marion out of her paralyzed state. She felt driven to stand and search for a means of escape. The door leading back inside was too thick to be pounded down, nor was there any window to be smashed open and then climbed through. If she began crying and shouting and beating on the door with her hands, It would only be Hector that she awakened, and not Grandpa Tom. He would strike her and then barricade the door with something to muffle the sounds coming through it. Worse still, all that noise would likely bring the crawling thing straight to where Marion was still trying to hide. She climbed from her place near the chimney over the railing of the Widow's Walk, and then again over the walk's other side. Moving toward the edge of the roof, she could feel that the numbness in her fingers and toes would surely cause them to fail her. She would tumble to her death if she tried to scale the estate's exterior. Still, she pressed forward a few bold steps towards the roof's edge. Just below her were vine trellises and windows to pry open for hope at getting inside. As Marion's foot landed at the threshold of the overhang, a loose shingle came free beneath her shoe. It clattered down the slope of the roof until it went sailing over the side. Marion yelped as she caught her balance. She had barely spared herself from tumbling down to the ground along with the roofing tile. In response to her outcry, Marion heard the various clattering sounds of strange things climbing the house suddenly all stop. The silence then turned at once into the noise of a dozen or more heavy limbs gamboling in her direction. The sound became like an engine, pressing methodically toward her location to investigate, when previously there had only been wandering melodies of sound. Marion hurried back toward the chimney. She hoped to hide against the shape of it and moved quickly and quietly to do so. Climbing back across the rails of the Widow's Walk, Marion turned to press her back tightly against the brickwork of the flue's exterior. She worked to steady her breathing and remain quiet. The din of pounding limbs reached the place on the roof where she had cried out. Although the creatures were drawing nearer in their investigation, the rooftop noises soon returned to the aimless jaunts she had heard before. With painstaking care not to dislodge another shingle or tap against the roof too loudly, she once more used her scarf to tuck her hands and feet warmly against herself. "It all isn't real," she said silently in her head. "I'm half awake but still dreaming." She tried to remember poise and patience and focused on counting out a few seconds between each of her breaths. It seemed to draw frightened, ragged breaths, heedless of her instructions that it should slow down. After countless minutes, she passed once more into an exhausted state of sleep. It was finally morning when she awoke again. In her dream, before the dawn came, more humanoid forms were moving in the dark all around the estate's grounds. They lurched and cantered forward on uneven appendages, keeping distance from each other but patrolling in a terrible unison of purpose. It seemed to Marion that they were combing Ernstmoor Estate, methodically searching for something under cover of nightfall. Just like the stars above, they were countless and yet distinct in their formations. Her fearful dream told a story where the demonic things found their way up to the Widow's Walk. They crawled in rows that were like unnatural ant trails, and they were coming to collect her. Marion envisioned hellish faces, revealing blood-soaked teeth to begin devouring her. And then she awoke with a gasp to find the sun had finally arrived. Hector arrived to retrieve Marion just before breakfast was served. He knew that the child's absence would draw Tom Ernst's ire and earn Hector new condemnations for what he had done. Marion felt half frozen and very hungry by that time. She had shivered and slept all night fretfully rather than resting. Hector feigned magnanimous authority as he unlatched the lock to appear there on the Widow's Walk. I hope you learned your lesson about sneaking off near bedtime, he told her. His tone and expression then shifted into something more malicious and playful. You saw a few of those crawling fellows moving around the estate grounds late last night, I'd wager. Marian's blood ran cold. How could Hector have guessed the nature of her terror so perfectly? Had the events of last night been some kind of prank? Impossible, Marian realized. She had seen at least one of the shadowy forms scale a tall fence with inhuman speed. Hector indeed did not have the agility to frighten her in this way. Her mind raced to make sense of things. Hector leaned forward and brought his face very close to hers. Widening his eyes and clicking his teeth together, he performed an excellent imitation of the things from her dream. It was just how she imagined the creatures would look before they devoured her alive. Hector's face returned to a dour, condescending expression as he straightened his back once more to tower over her. Marian wondered for a moment if she was becoming delusional. Hector moved aside to let her back into the warmth of Ernstmore Estate's interior. Just count yourself lucky that it was so cold last night, Hector murmured as she stumbled inside. Otherwise, they might have smelled you up here.
I don't know exactly how this story started. It was already in motion well before I became aware of it. My involvement in it began with Christian and Philip. Christian, who was always late, and Philip, who was always early. These two were part of our same friend group, but as you might expect, they often passed like ships in the night. It was even a joke that they were the same person, like Clark Kent and Superman, and that's why you never saw them in the same room together. Obviously they weren't, and in fact we routinely hung out with both of them at the same time. But if either of them brought that up, we'd just accuse one or the other of being a paid actor hired to throw us off the scent. So, the night of the dinner party, the night of the attacks, it wasn't any surprise to anyone that we were several hours in and Christian wasn't there yet. Nor was it any particular surprise when Philip announced that he had an early morning ahead of him and was heading home. He was always the first one to tap out of any social gathering. It was really convenient, honestly. He clearly felt no social stigma about declaring that he'd had enough, and it freed the rest of us up to leave whenever without being the one who bailed out early. Phil said his goodbyes, and then it was just the five of us. Me, Hamish, and Charlene, and Silvio and Abram. No one there was the kind to make me feel like a fifth wheel, but I definitely knew that I was the only one there not coupled up. I was just thinking that maybe I should call it an early night and follow Phil out the door when Christian showed up. He entered with his usual gusto, banging open the door and loudly declaring, "Now it's a party! Friends, you won't believe what I found!" "Is it a watch?" Silvio asked pointedly. "We finished the dinner party over an hour ago." "Ah, you only finished the dinner part. Now we're at the party bit. Anyway, we both know you didn't set a place for me." It was true. Silvio and Abram had not. We would have made room for Christian at the table if he'd been there on time, of course, and certainly he would have gotten food, but there really hadn't been many leftovers as it was. We all knew he was never going to be there to eat it. "As an apology for my tardiness and an attempt to win my way back into your good graces, I have brought wine," Christian said, producing 2 bottles from a bag slung over his shoulder. "And another gift which I discovered on the way here, but which I will only unveil once we have had a chance to properly set the scene." Silvio accepted the bottles with a nod of thanks and carried them over to the bar. "I assume you like the first glass from your gift?" he asked as he uncorked the first bottle. "Well, I'd hate for you to think it might be poisoned," laughed Christian. "I'm merely demonstrating that I wouldn't give you anything I wouldn't drink myself." Silvio passed a glass over to Christian. He sniffed it, sampled it, and declared it good. Fit for my hosts, he boomed. And as you can see, no unexplained rashes or foaming at the mouth. The two classic signs of poisoning, said Charlene. Well, I've never been poisoned, so I'm only guessing. The point is, drink up, friends. Silvio poured glasses for us all and handed them around. Only 6? Asked Christian. None for good, Philip? Silvio cocked an eyebrow at him. Is this your way of saying that you'd like a glass for each of your personalities? You still only have one mouth. We're different people, Christian protested, as you'll see shortly when he gets back from the bathroom or wherever he is. Uh-huh, said Hamish. He made air quotes with his fingers. Phil left just before you got here, as if you didn't know. Totally different person than Phil. Christian looked confused. Okay, no, but seriously, he's really not here? You know you two run on different schedules, Charlene said. Right, yeah, but his car is still outside. This revelation was met with confounded silence from all of us. Huh? Charlene said after a moment. Maybe he was just getting ready to leave as you pulled up, and you just didn't see him in the car? Abram got up from the couch and crossed to the front window. He peered out, cupping his hands around his eyes to block out the light from the living room. No, Christian's right, he reported. His car's still out there. We got up to look, as if we might see something different. Sure enough, Phil's car sat in the yard with everyone else's, still and silent. We could see no sign of movement from inside. I'm going to make sure he's all right, said Abram, putting on his shoes. The rest of us followed suit, curious to see what was going on. Armed with our cell phone flashlights and our glasses of wine, we traipsed out into the night to see what our friend was doing. I don't know what I expected. To see him changing a tire, maybe, or taking a nap in the back seat. Certainly he had to be somewhere in the vicinity of the car. Where else would he go? We were easily 20 miles outside of town. The house was surrounded by acres of woods. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile down the road. And yet, the car was empty and still locked. I peered inside just in case, but saw nothing more than a coffee cup in the cup holder and a sweatshirt folded up on the passenger seat. There was nowhere for Philip to hide inside the car, even if he had any reason for wanting to do so. Maybe he got an Uber? Abram asked uncertainly. We all drank some at dinner. Maybe he didn't want to drive. It seemed unlikely. None of us had seen him call for a rideshare, and surely if he had, he would have waited inside the house with us and left when the driver arrived. Still, no other option made any sense at all. So I slowly began to talk myself around to believing it. Then Hamish said, "What's this on the ground?" We all gathered around to look. He was near the trunk of Phil's car. His flashlight was focused on a patch of grass 3 or 4 feet across. The grass seemed oddly shiny and dark at the same time, like oil had spilled on it. Hamish crouched and swiped a finger carefully across a blade of grass. A long, sticky strand stretched between his hand and the grass as he stood back up, snapping only after it was a foot or more in length. Hamish made a face as he inspected his finger. Ugh, that's gross. It feels like snot. Disgusting, Hamish, said Charlene, but his attention was still focused on his finger. He rubbed it against his thumb, then sniffed it. Is that blood? He asked. Blood doesn't stretch like that, Silvio said. Yeah, but look at this. He held his fingers out as we crowded around. Beneath the slimy coating, his thumb and forefinger shone red with what looked all the world like blood. But what would it be from? Abram asked. We all shone our lights around, looking for the source of the blood and goo. Silvio gasped. Phil's under the car! Phil, are you all right? He knelt. An instant later, he screamed, falling over backwards and scrambling to get away. Silvio, what is it? Abram demanded, but I had already seen what he had seen. Phil's hand was sticking out from under the car, but Phil was not under there. The hand ended halfway down the forearm in a ragged, bloody stump. The severed end glistened with a thick, gelatinous goo. The rest of Phil's body was nowhere to be seen. The next few minutes were chaotic. There was shouting, screaming, and running. We all went for the house, which was good because it kept us together, but we were definitely in each other's way. I've never truly understood panic as I did in that moment. I knew what to do, knew that I should be calm, but that tiny detached part of me could only watch as I fled like a frightened animal. I got myself back under control once I was inside, and there was a wall between me and whatever had happened outside. I called the police and told them what we'd found. They assured me that the house was the safest place to be and recommended that we all stay together for safety until they got there. Lock the doors, they said, as if we hadn't done that the instant that Abram's heels had crossed the threshold. Okay, the police are coming, I told everyone as I hung up. They'd obviously all been listening to my half of the conversation anyway, but I felt the need to say something. They'll be here soon. How soon is soon? Asked Silvio, his voice rising. Someone murdered Philip. They cut him up, and we never heard anything. Abram pulled Silvio close and held him as he shook. It'll be okay. We've just got to sit tight. We'll be out of this soon. Philip won't, Silvio sobbed. No one had any response to that. We all just listened to Silvio cry. Hamish crossed to the fireplace and picked up a poker. He looked at us almost sheepishly. Better than not being armed at all, he said. Charlene cast a doubtful eye over the remaining implements, an ash shovel and a brush. I'll just stand behind you then. Are the windows locked? Christian asked. How about the back door? I think so, Abram said. They should be. I'll go check, said Christian and left the room. We heard him moving around, followed by a sudden shout of surprise. Christian! I shouted, leaping to my feet, but he was already hurrying back into the room. His eyes were wide. This is nuts, but I swear I just saw Phil's face at the window, he said. What if he's not dead? Someone tore his arm off, Charlene pointed out. Yeah, but that's survivable. Look, I don't know. All I know is, as I turned toward one of the windows, I saw a face staring in at me. I swear it was his. I shouted. The face vanished. I came back in here. He paused. I want to open the back door and see if he's outside. No way, said Silvio. No way. He might be alive, Christian insisted. And if he is, he needs our help. I'm not stupid enough to open the door by myself and let some serial killer in to hack everyone up. I want you all to come with me. And if you're all against it, then fine. We pretend I just imagined it and we never open the door. But I want to look. I don't want to leave him out there. Silvio was already shaking his head again, but Abram spoke up first. If there's even a chance, we should look. We were fine when we were out front together. We can afford a quick look out the back door, and if we can still somehow save Phil, we have to try. I'm not going, said Silvio. Christian nodded. Stay here with him, he said to Abram. The four of us will go look. We'll be right back, either with Phil or with the knowledge that we couldn't have helped him. Hamish, Charlene, Christian, and I made our way to the back door. We let Hamish lead, since he had the only weapon, but once we entered the kitchen, the rest of us armed ourselves with knives. Where did you see him? I asked. Christian indicated one of the windows. He was right there. I was walking this way when... Look! Hamish cut him off, pointing the poker at a different window. I swung my head in that direction just in time to see a face disappearing into the darkness. It was poorly lit, and I had only barely glimpsed it, but it might well have been Phil. There had been something wrong, though. He'd seemed almost to glisten like an oil slick. I thought about the dark slime on the grass and wondered how badly hurt he was. Is he okay? What's he doing? Asked Charlene. I don't know, said Christian. Back me up. I'm opening the door. We nervously took up defensive positions as Christian turned the handle. The door opened, letting in the cool night air. Outside was dark and quiet. Even the bugs seemed to have gone silent. Phil? Christian called, taking a step onto the back stoop. Phil, say something if you need help. He paused and we all listened but heard nothing. Christian took another step outside, raising his cell phone light high. "Philip!" "He's not there," Hamish said. "I don't know what you saw, but..." There was a sudden skittering of feet, and then the window smashed. Something huge, jagged and opalescent smashed its way through. It stood as tall as a small horse, with legs like a praying mantis and a shell like something from the deep ocean. As it scrabbled frantically inside, two of those serrated legs dug deep into Hamish's shoulders. Hamish shouted, swinging frantically with the poker, but he was inside its grip and couldn't get a good hit. "Help me!" he cried, but I was frozen by what I saw on the creature's shell. It was lumpy and misshapen, the shiny surface raised into smooth protrusions that looked strikingly like various animals. In the middle of them all, staring at me from less than a foot away, was a human face. It was unmistakably Phil's, sticking outward from the hard shell of the creature as if it had been shoved into a wet mold. The creature hissed. A rank vapor rolled outward from it, stinking of rot and stinging the eyes. I fell back, coughing, and as I did so, the mouth on its belly irised open. Its entire underside was one tremendous mouth, ringed with row upon row of slicing, sharp-edged teeth. It contracted its forelimbs, dragging Hamish closer, and he screamed again. Then Christian was there, grabbing the poker away from Hamish and smashing blow upon punishing blow down onto the creature's shell. The thick surface resisted the first two hits, but on the third strike, a ragged crack appeared. The creature hissed again, filling the room with that horrible stench, but Christian continued to pummel it. Charlene, emboldened by his success, began to stab at it with her knife. Her slashes skidded off the shell, so she switched to striking at it from underneath, stabbing it in the soft gray tissue of its mouth. I struck it with one good blow in the mouth with my knife, but it jerked as I hit it and pulled the knife away from me. I tried to grab it back, but the gnashing teeth dissuaded me. Instead, I seized the nearest limb and wrenched it upward, off of Hamish's shoulder. I could feel spines tearing into my palms, but I ignored the pain and shoved as hard as I could until I saw Hamish twist free. Unwilling to lose its meal, the monster lunged forward, dragging its entire bulk into the house. It knocked me over, pinning my legs beneath it. The wet slime engulfed my shin. The teeth began to dig in. I felt myself being drawn under. Before I could be dragged beneath, Christian stabbed downward using the poker as a spear. The shell, now spiderwebbed with cracks from the repeated blows, shattered beneath this final assault. Whatever the poker struck beneath the protective carapace must have been vital, for the creature collapsed almost at once. I tried to pull my leg free, but the teeth threatened to flay my skin, and instead I called for help. "Get this thing off of me!" It was Abram and Silvio who rushed my aid. To the aid of all of us, really. We were all bleeding, coughing, and panting from exertion. The encounter had taken less than half a minute, yet I felt as if I'd finished a triathlon. Abram and Silvio had barely had time to get to the kitchen doorway before it was all over. They lifted the monster's body, allowing me to slide free. They brought towels, bandages, and antiseptic. They wrapped my hands, Hamish's shoulder, and a dozen miscellaneous injuries that Charlene and Christian had suffered. They were simple, important tasks. They gave us something to focus on. They kept us from having to think about what had happened. Eventually, though, everything was cleaned and bandaged, and a dead monster still lay at our feet. Ichor dripped from its wounds, mixing with our blood and its horrible thick saliva to make a spreading puddle on the kitchen tiles. And the face of our dead friend still stared sightlessly up from the creature's side. "What is it?" Abram finally asked. It's not like he thought any of us would have the answer, but someone had to say something. "How could... where did... what is it?" "Exactly what we already knew," Hamish said grimly. "Philip's gone." "You don't think, maybe..." Charlene started, but Hamish cut her off. "No. Look at all the rest of these. Squirrels, cats. That one looks like maybe a fox. These are what it's been eating. It kills them and then somehow presses their face into its shell. Look, the smaller ones are less distinct. It's been growing as it eats. working its way up to bigger and bigger things. The impressions of the small animals have been stretched out as the shell grows. The bigger ones, the ones it's only been able to get recently, they're perfectly clear. And Philip. He trailed off, not needing to finish. Philip's face was as clear as if it had been sculpted. He was gone, like everything else depicted on the creature's shell. But why? Silvio asked. What does it get out of taking impressions of the things it eats? Mating ritual, maybe, I suggested. Animals have all sorts of weird ways to attract mates. This would show how proficient of a hunter it was, so that... I stopped abruptly. Christian's face, normally ruddy and animated, had gone slack and turned a sickly pale green. No, he muttered. Mates, of course. What? I asked. He looked around at the shattered window, at the wide open room. Everyone, quick, we need to get to a safer space. But it's dead, Abram started. Now, barked Christian. Abram jumped, alarmed. Is the living room good enough? Somewhere without windows would be best. Somewhere we can all fit. Silvio was shaking his head. It's an open plan. There's nothing like that. Anywhere where we can turn the lights off and hide then, insisted Christian. What's going on? I asked plaintively. I told you I found something on the way here. Come back to the living room. I'll show you. We all followed him in a tight herd. Christian retrieved the bag that had contained the wine and reached inside. He pulled out a smooth, gleaming white pearl, bigger than any fist. Oily rainbows flicked across its surface as he held it up for our inspection. Is that a pearl? Asked Silvio. I thought it was. Not a real one, obviously, but something manufactured, maybe. I found a cluster of them on the side of the road on the way here, nestled up against the trunk of a tree. I thought maybe they'd fallen off of a truck. There certainly wasn't anyone else around to claim them, so I took them. But we know now, don't we? They're not pearls. Christian walked over to the fireplace and set the pearl down on the bricks. Kneeling next to it, he raised the poker over his head and swung it downward, impacting the smooth sphere with a resounding crack. The pearl smashed open. A thick, gray liquid oozed out into the fireplace. Among the brittle shards, something moved. It was about the size of my cupped palm, with jagged legs and a smooth, shimmering shell, still unmarked by any protrusions. It was the creature we had fought, wrought in miniature. Christian crushed it brutally with the poker. He grabbed his bag and upended it, dumping out 5 more spheres. Again and again, he brought the poker down, shattering the shells and destroying the tiny creatures within. Mates, he said in between blows, there's no such thing as one of something. Nothing's unique. Everything that lives breeds. We didn't find the only one. We just found the first. But you found its nest, I offered. I found a nest. What are the odds these are the only 6 eggs? And if these were laid in a clutch, the one that we killed, the full-grown one, probably had siblings too. He stood, his murderous work done, assuming that one was even full-grown. Just then, blue strobing lights washed through the room. Through the front door, we could see a police car outside. We need to get them in here, Christian said, striding to the front door. They have no idea of the danger they're As he opened the door, a creature took him in the left shoulder with a hooked forelimb. It spun him around and dragged him out backwards, dropping its bulk across his torso and driving him to the porch with a sickening snap. Christian's legs kicked twice and went still. I heard the confused shouts of the police, followed rapidly by gunshots. The creature on the porch jerked from repeated impacts before collapsing over what was left of Christian's body. Even as its life drained away, I could see the shell slowly rising, molding itself into the beginnings of a head-sized lump. There was a scream from outside. It was followed by more gunshots, then another scream, this one more intelligible. Get it off! Get it! Then, there was nothing. I would like to say that I made a considered plan, that I decided that the creatures outside were probably occupied and it would be safe to make a run for it. I would like to say that I urged my friends to join me. The truth of the matter is that something snapped in my mind, and I ran. I had seen too much that night, and all I wanted was to be somewhere I never had to see anything like it again. Hamish and Charlene ran with me. I know this because I heard Charlene screaming Hamish's name, and Hamish simply screaming as something massive dragged him off into the night. I do not know if Charlene made it to her car. I don't know if Abram and Silvio were safe in their house. All I know is that I got to my car and floored it out of there, spitting chunks of dirt from the yard as the tires dug for traction. I hit the road and never looked back. I didn't stop until I was all the way back home, at which point I collapsed against my steering wheel and wept. I called, of course, once I was myself again. I tried all of their phones. I don't know what I would have said if they had answered, but it doesn't much matter, as none of them picked up. Abram, Silvio, Charlene, I know where they are. They're all out there somewhere in the woods, their faces pressed horribly against the inside of an opalescent shell.
Henry Grayson heard a mournful howl of wind when he stopped to catch his breath. After a harrowing dash through the forest, he rested his head against an old oak's trunk for support. Looking up, bare limbs swayed in the cold fall gusts. Moisture-laden clouds raced northwest to southeast, playing hide-and-seek with the moon. The on-and-off darkness obscured the landscape ahead. A sense of vertigo swept over him as he gasped for air and experienced the altering illumination. Far in the distance, he heard a low rumble. The first evidence of an approaching storm made itself known. His panic intensified. As the thunder grew louder, the cloud density could thicken and reduce the light from the moon. He would be trapped in this nightmare of a forest where directions seemed meaningless. A sudden rustle of leaves from behind spurred him to run again. Only the dimming light from the moon kept him from running headlong into one of the many trees spread out before him. A sudden clap of thunder settled into a low rumble as he struggled to catch his breath. Looking toward the sky, the lunar disk grew more obscure as a solid haze of cloud enclosed around it. Sounds of pursuers grew louder as he plunged ahead. His lungs felt on the verge of bursting. A fallen log tripped him. He fell face down in the thick carpet of leaves shed by their once gracious hosts. Panic engulfed him. He had to keep moving. When he tried to push himself up, a force pressed hard on his back, and his face once again encountered the damp loam on the forest floor. A stinging sensation burned between his shoulder blades, and the vertigo returned. The sounds of the storm faded as his world turned black. Grayson's eyes fluttered open. A strong scent of moist earth permeated his surroundings. Bound to the hard surface where he lay, his arms and legs were immobile. Enclosed by darkness, only a horizontal streak of light could be seen low to his left. The dim radiance failed to reveal any details of the space. A tear trickled down his temple after he blinked to clear an irritation in his eye. Metal on metal clattered above the thin slit of illumination. A door opened, revealing a shadow surrounded by a halo of brightness. "Ah, Grayson, you're finally awake." "No thanks to you. If memory serves, you're the one who decided to take an unauthorized stroll after dark. Did I not warn you about the folly of trekking through the forest at night?" Grayson closed his eyes and remained quiet. "You should thank me. Where you fell is a lospa, subject to flash floods, particularly during storms like the one we experienced last night." "I am so very fortunate." "Yes, you are, but I should mention your sarcasm is not appreciated." A shearing pain shot through his lower extremities. He gritted his teeth and took a sharp breath. The silhouette figure said, "Do I have your attention?" Through a clenched jaw, he said, "Yes." "Good. Professor Grayson, The contract you signed with my laboratory specified your expertise in genetics would be at our disposal. You're currently in violation of that agreement. I didn't know you'd be conducting experiments on humans. The man sighed. Oh, Professor, you are so naive. How could we conduct authentic genetic manipulations if we didn't work on human volunteers? You never mentioned that. Grayson heard a chuckle emerge from the gloom. My good doctor, why would I want to use rats? There are plenty of wretched souls in the northern part of this island. Individuals, I might add, who do not enhance the human condition. Experimenting on people is unethical. Please spare me your moral platitudes. If we are to survive as a species, we will need to possess superior senses and intelligence over the coming millennia. Evolution is too slow for man to adapt to the rapid environmental changes we are experiencing. Therefore, it will be up to us to create our own enhancements. So you plan to be the one who provides these improvements by playing God? Playing God has nothing to do with it, Professor. Creating a superior human is the ultimate goal. Can you imagine what wealthy individuals will spend to have a clone of themselves? One that will have enhanced intelligence and senses? It's all about the money, isn't it? Doctor, you are once again relying on flawed Judeo-Christian ethos. Attitudes from a time and place which no longer exist. In today's world, everything is about money and power. I might remind you, money buys power. No, will not be part of your scheme. That's too bad. Another searing pain spread through his spine until Nobel Prize-winning geneticist Henry Grayson, MD and PhD, succumbed to darkness. Galiano Island, located between Vancouver Island and the lower mainland of British Columbia, Canada, is available to mainlanders only by ferry. A long and narrow island, a majority of the land is covered in deciduous and evergreen trees. Access to various parts of the island is by modern paved roads, while other portions rely only on old logging trails. The laboratory, now occupied by Dr. Grayson against his will, resided in a less traveled, heavily wooded, privately owned tract of land near the southern tip of the island. Self-contained with the utilization of solar panels and wind turbines, few individuals knew of its existence or significance. The owner of the land, Victor Dew, protected his privacy and avocation with diligence and resolve. Watching the setting sun, he sat on his veranda warmed by a standalone brick fire pit. The deep purples and oranges on the horizon indicated another storm brewed to the west. After a sip of his single malt scotch imported from the mainland, he turned to his assistant in the chair next to him. I had hoped Dr. Grayson would be more open to our project, my dear. Victor, you need to vet these people better, or it will be the same each time you bring one of them into your confidence. Cheryl Ward sipped a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. She looked at Victor. Your vision is far ahead of the current scientific thought. Most geneticists still look at your research as furthering the practice of eugenics. Nothing could be further from the truth. You and I both know that. However, many of your contemporaries have the perception your research will only benefit the elite. Dew sipped his scotch as dusk turned to night. In a sense, they are right. In the beginning, only those who can afford the procedure will benefit. But like most new ideas and inventions, the costs will decrease as the technology is improved. She sipped her wine and watched the distant flashes of lightning off in the western sky. Yes, my darling, and you will hold the patents on the technology. The next morning, Dew observed the failed experiment through the one-way glass. The individual paced like a caged lion, even though it possessed few genetic sequences from the species Panthera leo. The creature resembled a wolf, but with numerous human characteristics. With the familiar long snout, the similarity ended there as it morphed into the rounded skull of a human female. Hunched over, the forearms were longer than the rear legs, which caused the creature to move with a gait similar to a lowland gorilla. The thick black fur covering the beast appeared to be a mix of a canine and chimpanzee. He folded his arms and spoke into a microphone next to a medical monitor showing the creature's heart and respiratory rates. "Good morning, Heidi." The pacing stopped. She bared her fangs, glared at the window, and emitted a low growl. "You know where I am, don't you?" The snarl intensified. "You have more innate intelligence than you are allowing us to see." The howl changed to a series of barks and wails. She charged the window but stopped just short of ramming it. The head lowered, but the eyes stayed locked on Dew, even though she could not see him. A low-pitched moan resonated through the speakers next to the medical monitor. Turning off the microphone, Dew checked the monitor and saw an accelerated heart and respiratory rate. "Good, your emotions are maturing and producing the proper physiological response." The door to the observation lab opened, and a woman of small stature entered. "Good morning, Dr. Dew." "Morning, Miss Hines. What are your instructions this morning concerning Heidi's diet?" "Continue with the high-protein, low-carbohydrate combination for another week. We'll see if her cognitive responses continue to improve. I'm very pleased with her progress so far." "Yes, doctor." The diminutive woman shut the door and left. He pulled a chair out from a desk and sat. With a touch on a keyboard, the computer monitor brightened and he retrieved his prior notes. He typed, "Subject has exhibited heightened perception this AM and appears to sense my presence through the observation window. DNA analysis has determined the slicing we attempted did not manifest itself in the precise way we envisioned. However, the appearance of acute awareness by the subject is encouraging. The procedure may eventually be capable of producing the results originally hypothesized." He stopped typing and removed his glasses. Dr. Grayson's input into the process of splicing DNA had taken the project to this point. His refusal to assist further could only be described as catastrophic for the project. Standing, he went back to the observation window to see if Heidi would sense his presence. The creature lay curled up with its head down. As soon as Dew stood in front of the window, she raised her head, stared in his direction, bared her fangs, and issued a low grumble. Hearing the sound, Dew checked to make sure all sounds were being recorded inside the creature's habitat. "Very good, Heidi." Henry Grayson, emeritus professor of evolutionary genetics at Stanford University, stared at the ceiling. His absence and lack of communication with former colleagues would not create any warning signs. Habitually a loner, he never married and lived alone for decades. He rarely saw his housekeeper since she came late mornings once a week, and he had given her notice he would be out of town for the foreseeable future. Remorse consumed him at having taken the position Dr. Dew offered without making proper inquiries. The project and the man's intentions weighed heavy on his mind. Released from the metal table in the laboratory and escorted back to his dorm room, Grayson speculated how much longer he would be allowed to live. He possessed little hope of ever being released to spread the word about all the horrendous experiments being conducted at this facility. He lay in his bed with his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling when he heard a knock on his door. He ignored it. The knocking persisted, but at a higher volume. Finally, he rose and went to the door. "Yes." "Professor Grayson, it's Victor Dew. I would like to discuss a proposal." "What kind of a proposal?" "May I come in?" "You obviously have a key. Use it." "I would prefer you voluntarily let me in." "Very well." He unlocked the door and let it swing open as he stepped back into the room. Dew stood there, a slight grin on his face as he stepped in. "Thank you, Professor. What do you want?" "Your continued cooperation with our project. We had this discussion the other night. I will not take part in unethical or illegal experiments. Even if the one we conducted has proven to be successful?" Grayson studied Dew silently for several moments. What do you mean successful? Your work has produced a sentient being. The geneticist from Stanford remained quiet as he determined whether to believe this man he distrusted. He turned his back and walked to his bed. Did you hear me, Professor Grayson? Yes, I heard you. The last time I saw the creature, it did not appear aware of its surroundings. That is a far cry from being sentient. Heidi's awareness and cognitive abilities grow exponentially with each day. Grayson sat on the unmade bunk and studied the floor. Does it have the ability to voice sounds other than grunts? Yes. Looking up, the professor said, I don't believe you. Dew held up a small device and pressed a button. The sound emitted from the small recorder resembled a growl, but Grayson distinctly heard the words, Let me out. The creature paced in the small room, turning to the observation window on every other pass. Grayson said, She is only looking at her image as she passes the mirror. She is not aware we are here. As he finished speaking, the creature charged the glass and stopped just before reaching it. The words he heard on the recording were repeated. Let me out. The voice low and rumbling. You see, Dr. Grayson, she hears you, even though our microphones are off. She senses our presence in the room. Fascinating. Are you now ready to help again? Grayson remained quiet as he followed Heidi's movements. Have you let her outside yet? No, we do not know her strength. The professor turned to Dew. You haven't let her out of the cage? No, all of this development has occurred in the past 3 days, with the only interaction being with her dietitian and myself, all through remote access. No personnel contact. Fascinating. He stayed near the window and kept his gaze on the creature as it paced in the room again. You must find an open space for her to roam where she will be safe. Professor, that is the first time you have referred to it by gender. I beg your pardon? You have always referred to Heidi as it, or the creature, never as a female. Grayson turned to Dew. What did I call it? You said her and she. The professor glanced back at the creature who now lay on the floor of the cage like a content puppy dog, head up and concentrating on the window from which they observed her. He said, You mentioned a DNA analysis earlier. May I see it? Dew handed the professor a manila folder. The man accepted the file without a word and studied the contents. 5 minutes later, he closed it and handed it back to Dew. I see where I made my mistake. 3 months later, Henry Grayson no longer felt the compulsion to dispute the ethics of the experiments he conducted. Curiosity replaced indignation, driving him to work 20-hour days, stopping only briefly for a snack or a 3 or 4 hour nap. His concentration stayed on target day after day without diminishing returns. Victor Dew no longer kept track of him, instead letting the professor follow his pursuits without supervision. On the 3rd day of the 3rd week in the 3rd month of Grayson's renewed enthusiasm, he summoned Victor Dew to meet him in the laboratory at precisely noon. Yes, Professor. Ah, Dew, you're here. I need you to build an outdoor encampment. Folding his arms, the complex's owner asked, Why? If you will remember, when we allowed Heidi to be in a larger space, her progression with perception and language grew exponentially. Yes. She allowed others to get in close proximity to her. Unfortunately, she lacked a gene sequence essential for the development of her immune system. She died of a common cold. I am very much aware of this, Professor. So, why do we need an outdoor area for our subjects? To allow them to be exposed to naturally occurring viruses and bacteria. Otherwise, we will constantly repeat what we created with Heidi. Very well. I will have one constructed. Thank you. Late winter. The fruits of Grayson's efforts were 2 beings, one female and one male, Both resembled the physical appearance of Heidi, but with specific changes in their DNA sequencing. The professor's observation of the two subjects occurred from a camouflage deck high above the newly built and enclosed habitat. For lack of a better way to identify them, the professor dubbed them Adam and Eve. Neither showed any aggression toward their human caregivers. From the observations and interaction between them and Grayson, he hypothesized their intelligence to be greater than Heidi's. However, neither had uttered any coherent words so far, mostly grunts and clicks. During an early morning scheduled observation, Victor Dew joined Grayson. "How are your creations doing this morning, Professor?" "I am developing a note of concern about them. While their perception and reasoning skills are far superior to Heidi's, they have yet to develop language." "Language you understand, or are they non-communicative?" Grayson glanced at Dew for a second before returning his gaze on the scene below their location. "Interesting question, Dr. Dew. However, I am a geneticist, not a linguist. Someone with a different skill set would need to determine the answer." "I obtained the services of Cheryl Ward before I started this endeavor. She is a linguistic anthropologist and would be more than happy to assist your assessment of Adam and Eve." With a raised eyebrow, Grayson nodded. "I believe that would be appropriate." 2 weeks later, the meeting occurred in the office of Cheryl Ward. "Adam and Eve have a system of communicating which is highly complex, Dr. Grayson." "Explain, Ms. Ward." "What we hear as clicks, grunts, and growls are very specific sounds forming a vocabulary only they apparently understand. I have been able to deduce the meaning of some combinations, but not enough to be able to communicate with them. That will take months." Dew asked, "Professor Grayson, could there be a mutation in the genetic sequence which dictates the development of vocal cords?" "Possibly, but I am most intrigued by how rapidly they developed a distinct language." Cheryl Ward nodded. "I too would like to know how they did it. In most human cultures, language is learned. Vocabulary evolves within a group and is passed from one generation to the next. This development between them is most intriguing." An extremely loud alarm bell sounded. At the exact same moment, Victor Dew's cell phone pinged. Accepting the call, Dew listened as a frown grew on his face. He thanked the caller and said, "No one knows how they did it, but Adam and Eve are no longer in the compound. They've escaped." Dreams, nightmares, hallucinations, and visions haunted Henry Grayson once again. He could not distinguish between them anymore. When he slept, the pictures continued to get worse. He could not get the image of the now dead Heidi out of his mind's eye. Before her death, she had actually allowed him to place his hand on her head. 2 days later, she took her last breath, ravaged by a virus a normal human easily fought off. Now with the disappearance of Adam and Eve, the consequences of his research began to penetrate his conscience once again. The search for the elusive creatures by members of Victor Dew's staff continued, but so far, no trace of them could be found. On the 3rd day of the search, 2 staff members went missing. Victor Dew paced as he listened to Cheryl Ward. Doris Hines and Raymond Jones did not return from their assigned search area. Per your instructions, all search personnel are to be back before dark. That was an hour ago. They have yet to check in by radio. Where were they assigned? Southwest, to the shores of the Trincomalee Channel. Okay, arm our security personnel and send them in. If it becomes necessary, they are to protect themselves. I'll take care of it. Dew left his private study and took the elevator to the floor below and the location of Henry Grayson's room. He knocked on the door several times without a response. Finally, on the 4th series of rapping on the entrance, it opened. A disheveled Professor Grayson held the door open. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his weariness. The normally clean-shaven geneticist bore a 4-day-old beard. His appearance gave pause to Dew. Are you ill, Professor? No. Have they found Adam and Eve? The question answered Dew's concern. The geneticist's worry about the missing Adam and Eve were dominating his thoughts. No, now we have 2 staff members missing as well. Where were they searching? Southwest. Concentrate your search efforts there. Folding his arms, Dew asked, "Do you know something you have not informed us about?" Grayson stared at Dew for several moments and then nodded. "Should we consider Adam and Eve dangerous?" "Yes, extremely." "Why didn't you mention this before, Professor?" "Because you would have ordered them euthanized." Crimson spread up Dew's cheeks. He clenched his teeth and glared at the professor. "Grayson, if Hines and Jones are not found alive..." He turned and hurried to inform the rest of his team. The next morning, at the first light of dawn, 3 jeeps exited the entrance to Victor Dew's compound. Each contained a driver and a passenger. Both were armed with AR-15s chambered with .556 NATO rounds. Instructions from Victor Dew to these individuals demanded if they caught sight of Adam or Eve, shoot to kill. The creature known as Adam observed this activity from the safety of dense underbrush which concealed his location. To him, the past did not matter. Surviving, getting to tomorrow, and protecting his mate did. His mate, Eve, lay hidden 10 meters from where he crouched. Her scent had changed, creating an urgent need within him to protect her. Plentiful amounts of food presented themselves to the 2 creatures since escaping the confines of the building. Within the structure, trees existed, but underbrush did not. Adam preferred the underbrush, which offered opportunities to secure and capture sustenance. A new scent could be detected emanating from the building. The receptors in his snout caused an unease within him, an unease he did not understand until their encounter the previous day with the 2 hairless beings. Fear. The inhabitants of the building feared him and Eve. Instinctively, he knew this to be a powerful weapon, a weapon he could use against those who wished to return he and Eve to the confines of the building. Greg Dubois, head of security for Victor Dew's company, stopped the jeep, turned to the man who held the AR-15, Remy Rousseau, and pointed. "What does that look like over there?" Rousseau studied the area Dubois indicated. "Oh man, I hope it isn't what it looks like. Cover me, I'll check it out." The driver shifted the vehicle to park and reached for his rifle in the back seat. As Rousseau entered the underbrush, Dubois stood ready to protect if needed. Seconds ticked by as he neared the object he sought to examine. "It's her, Greg. Get a tarp." After the remains of Doris Hines were covered, Dubois returned to the jeep and reported the discovery on the radio. "This is Dubois. I need to speak to Victor." 2 minutes later, he heard, "What did you find, Greg?" "We found Doris." Silence came from the speaker. Finally, he heard, "I take it she is deceased." "Unfortunately, yes, sir." "Without going into details, how did she die?" "Violently." "I was afraid of that." The radio grew silent as Dubois waited for further instructions. "I will send someone to collect the body. Don't leave her alone until they get there. Give me your location." After he understood where the 2 men were, Dew asked, "Any sign of Raymond Jones?" "Not yet, sir." "Very well. Keep me posted." Originally trained as a medical doctor, Victor Dew's curiosity about creating a superhuman led him away from his lucrative medical practice to the field of research. With the recovery of Doris Hines' small body, he would utilize his knowledge of physiology to try to determine how she died. When he uncovered her on the examination table, he knew immediately the cause of death. Putting the sheet back over the woman, he went to the intercom next to the laboratory door and pressed a button. "Summon Professor Grayson to the lab immediately." A disconnected voice replied, "Yes, sir." 10 minutes later, an ashen-faced Henry Grayson stared at the mutilated body of Doris Hines. Dew asked, "Did you anticipate this, Professor?" A slow shake of Grayson's head became the answer. He remained quiet for almost a minute. This is what results when we play God, Victor. You seem to forget Adam and Eve are of your making. Man is not smart enough to understand the delicate balance years of natural selection provide a species. Your obsession with speeding up the process has caused this catastrophe. He turned his attention away from the body and looked at Dew. I was a fool to let my excitement of discovery overcome my repugnance for this research. Grayson, I have never seen anyone vacillate so fast between euphoric enthusiasm and self-loathing as you have. In my opinion, you are mentally unstable, and I have no further need for your assistance. Your contract with this institution is terminated, effective immediately. Now, get off my land. Dew turned and walked out of the laboratory, leaving Henry Grayson standing alone next to the partially consumed body of Doris Hines. The wide variety of sea life in the waters off the southern tip of Galliano Island and the northern shores of Main Island provided a sanctuary of sorts for Harold Betchworth. Now in his early 80s and a widower, his meager pension earned from working 4.5 decades as a longshoreman at the port of Vancouver barely sustained him. He sublimated his earnings by selling his daily catch to restaurants in the Richmond and Vancouver, British Columbia area. His small fishing boat trolled the waters 50 meters offshore of this unusually warm day in late August. With a successful morning behind him, he prepared to raise his nets one more time before heading for the mainland 20 kilometers to the northeast. After raising his starboard net with ease, he stored the catch in one of his many coolers and tossed ice on top. Efforts to raise his port net were not successful. He struggled with it for almost 10 minutes before it broke free and rose. The torn net hung empty as he stared at it. A noise to the stern caused him to turn and witness the emergence from the water of what he would later describe as a spawn of the devil. Henry Grayson boarded a ferry at the Sturdy's Bay Terminal for the ride to Tsawwassen, British Columbia Terminal. He originally arrived on Galliano Island via a car sent by Victor Dew. He did not receive the same courtesy for his journey back to the United States. After finding a secluded spot in the passenger lounge, he settled in for the ferry ride and to contemplate his future. Halfway across the channel, he overheard a conversation between two men laughing about the ravings of a senile old fisherman. When he heard the word wolfman spoken by one of the two, he paid closer attention to the discussion. 2 minutes later, he stood and approached the two men. Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Did you mention something about an old man transporting 2 wolfmen across the Strait of Georgia? The younger of the two men chuckled. Yeah, craziest story I ever heard. He's a local from Saskatchewan who makes a few extra bucks selling fresh fish to a pub I go to. He told the owner about these 2 wolf creatures who came out of the sea and had him take them to an isolated spot on the U.S. mainland. Did they mention where? The man stared at Grayson for a few moments. Nah, I stopped listening after that. Could you tell me the name of the pub? Why, do you believe the old coot? Grayson shook his head and smiled. No, but I like pubs that serve fresh fish. 2 hours later, he entered an establishment known as Rivera's Reef Tavern and sat at the bar. He ordered a fish and chips. After he finished his meal, he asked the bartender where he got his fish. Local guy goes out every morning and is back here by noon with his catch. I normally buy most of it. Why? It's hard to find good seafood where I'm from. Does he guide? Don't know. Never asked him. Know where he lives? I could check with him myself. No, sorry. But he'll be here in the morning a little after 10. You can ask him then. The next morning, Harold Betchworth tied his Everglades Center Console Bay boat to the dock alongside Rivera's Tavern. Henry Grayson stepped up and asked if he could assist. Betchworth raised an eyebrow. What for? I've got it. I understand you had 2 passengers the other day? The old man stopped what he was doing and stared at the stranger. Why would you care? So you can make fun of me too? No, because I know who they are and I need to find them. Betchworth looked hard at Grayson. Let me get my fish sword, and then you can buy me a beer. An hour later, Betchworth wolfed down a sandwich purchased for him by Grayson. After he ate, he sipped on a beer and eyed his benefactor. You never told me your name. Henry Grayson. So, you say you know them? No, I said I know who they are and I need to find them. The old man shrugged. Don't know where they are. They jumped out of the boat about 20 meters from shore and swam the rest of the way. Last I saw them, they were running toward a wooded area north of Neptune Beach. How did they communicate with you? That's the weird thing. They didn't. The male pointed toward the east and I understood what he meant. I'm sorry, he did what? I said the male pointed his finger and I knew where he wanted me to take them. They didn't say anything? Betchworth shook his head. Not a word. I did hear the female growl once, but she was rubbing her tummy. Grayson hesitated to ask his next question. Was there something wrong with her? She was pregnant. They told you? Nope. I just knew. Kind of like voices in my head, but not. Know what I mean? Henry Grayson wanted to ask more questions, but the revelation from the elderly man caused his head to swim. Finally, he said, Let me get this straight. You heard voices in your head? Not voices. Geez, people would really think I was crazy if I said anything like that. I just knew what they needed, and that's what I did. He took a sip of beer. Did you feed them, Mr. Betchworth? I didn't have to. They helped themselves to some of the fish I'd caught that day. Ate it raw, heads, scales, and all. Thought you said you knew them. Why are you asking all these questions? I need to find them. Good luck with that. The male acted like he didn't want to be found, but I think I know where they are headed. Where? There's an Indian nation not far from where they entered the woods. It's called the Lummi Reservation. Go on. It was more of a feeling than having someone tell me, you know? No, I'm afraid I don't. Grayson stood. Feel lucky you survived your encounter with these two. You are the first human to have contact with them and remain alive. He turned and walked out of the pub. As he went through the door, he heard Betchworth say, What do you mean, first human? The rest of the question could not be heard due to the crashing of waves on the dock. Grayson obtained a map of the Northwest Washington State region and located the Lummi Reservation. After numerous phone calls and transfers to individuals who could not help him, he reached a tribal elder. He made an appointment for the following day and immediately rented a car. Arriving 15 minutes ahead of his appointment at the Sovereignty and Treaty Protection Office, he stood in the parking lot and admired the natural beauty of the surrounding woodlands. At the appointed time, he was shown into the office of the head of the tribal council, Morgan Ballou. The man stood and offered his hand. As they shook, he said, It is an honor to meet you, Professor Grayson. I did an internet search on you before our appointment. You have quite the academic resume. I am flattered you took the time to do so, Mr. Ballou. The man gestured toward a chair in front of his desk. Please, make yourself comfortable. As they sat, Ballou clasped his hands together and looked Grayson in the eye. I will not tell you where they are. I beg your pardon? I know why you are here, and I will not expose their location. The female is with child, and it will be born as a sovereign citizen of this tribal nation. Grayson raised an eyebrow. Mr. Ballou, I do not believe you understand who or what you are protecting. We understand perfectly who we offered shelter to, Professor. Within our culture, all creatures of the earth are sacred. The two individuals we now protect may be more so than others. The conversation continued for another hour, with Morgan Ballou emphasizing the tribe's position numerous times. When Ballou escorted Grayson out of the office, he kept the door open. He stopped, folded his arms, and tilted his head slightly. Professor, we can appreciate your concern for our new guests, but do not attempt to find them. We are an ancient tribe with ancient beliefs and traditions. We will protect the child and its parents at all costs. His glare sent shivers up the professor's spine. By the time Grayson returned to his rental car, night had fallen. A stiff wind blew hard out of the northwest. Moisture-laden clouds played hide-and-seek across the face of a full moon. The scene reminded him of a night nearly a year ago. A similar howl in the wind gusting through the trees reached his ears. It was the night he ran through the forests of Galliano Island, running in an attempt to escape the nightmares he knew existed within the laboratories owned by Victor Dew. Now, due to his own assistance, those horrors had been released into the world.
Chilling tales for dark nights.